Okay, so we're gonna get started. I'm Jordan Horton. The treasurer of MANRRS here at U of M, and I'm facilitating this conversation around DEI at the university and in industry. We have two panelists here with us, Sean, which is a recent graduate, and then we have Logan, who's also a recent graduate from grad school. So we'll be saying goodbye to Logan soon, but you guys can introduce yourselves, and then I guess we'll just start off with the panel piece. And so the first question is just how has your perception of DI changed over time? It could be from childhood to now or just like over your course of your college experience, but you can just give a brief introduction and then answer that question.
Yeah, I can tackle that first. I'm Logan, EJ second year. I've been at Michigan since 2015. I've been in a lot of different roles. I worked for housing for 2 years, so I've been very intimately linked to a lot of the institutional DEI work that goes on at the university level. So that's where a lot of my experience lies. And in regards to this question, I think so. When I was growing up, I didn't really have much knowledge of DEI as a concept. Um, I think it wasn't until I got into middle school when I first noticed, I guess, just like the social aspects of DEI, because I grew up in Flint and it was like a really diverse place. And then I moved in middle school to a school district that was like 97% white. And it just struck me at how differently that space operated compared to what I had been used to. And so it was kind of then that I started just becoming aware of the fact that people's socialization around diversity, inclusion, and race is really different. And when I got to U of M, I think things kind of kicked into full gear. My freshman year, I joined my dorm's multicultural council, and that was really my first like real foray into doing community, like designing activities and doing community building with the people that I was living with around the topic of DE&I. And fast forward 2 years, I ended up becoming a diversity peer educator for housing, and I was responsible for managing a multicultural council, which is like a student-based organization that operates out of the dorm that puts on a lot of DEI programming for their peers. And I think that it was kind of at that moment where I noticed that it was something that I was passionate about, and that it was something that was really important in my life. I'll pass it over to Sean.
Thank you so much for sharing, Logan. So my path is definitely just I don't even know. Like I I think like I became increasingly aware about my I guess like growing up I went to predominantly white schools, and like even growing up for business, for example, I have a new interest in business, but before then I kind of didn't envision it for myself because I didn't really see anyone like me on TV. Most of the commercials, most of the stuff, like all the entrepreneurs, etc., were like, you know, not people of color. And going to University of Michigan definitely increased my awareness about diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially since like it's part of the mission of the university to increase that on campus, even if they're not perfect at it or they're really problematic when it comes to it. But something that I've been learning about is just I have some DEI training, and something that I really like is like diverse. This is from a Harvard resource, and I'm gonna quote this. It's not my knowledge. This is wisdom from someone else, and it's diversity is about quantity, inclusion is about quality. Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. Over time, Meyer's definition has been expanded to include belonging, being asked to share your playlist in the party context. And I think that's so beautiful that diversity, equity, inclusion is expanding to belonging, because sometimes we can have we can have representation, we can be having equal access to the table, but then we're not necessarily a part of the group. And so expanding everyone to the part of the group, the full spectrum diversity representation is something that I definitely appreciate and I'm excited about. And so I definitely have a growing interest in the belonging aspect of that and learning more about how I can contribute to that belonging aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you, Logan and Sean. And so before we're gonna break into like two separate portions of the event. We're gonna talk about the university and how DEI impacts us here on campus. And then we're gonna touch a little bit more on DEI and industry and how how to incorporate DEI into different aspects, whether it be looking into jobs or just being at a job and being concerned about DEI topics. But as a group, I wanted to get some general idea of where people's heads are in terms of DEI. And so I made a Menti, which is one of those things where you can like get people to put in words. And so I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna just, the question is gonna be what differences are included in the term diversity. And so being able to just kind of have a conversation around what is diversity and how it can play into different parts of our lives. So people could just use the code at the top. You go to menti.com and you put in the code and then it gives you the option to put in, I think, like 5 words, but you can also add in more after that. But we'll see what is on most people's minds.
Hey, Jordan, can you clarify the question a little bit?
So like what differences are included in the term diversity? So, when people say diversity, usually the most common thing people think is race. But there are other things that can be, thought of as diversity or having a diverse setting. So like what types of things go into defining a diverse setting?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, has everyone had a chance to input some of their thoughts? Okay. These are kind of things that we consider as a part of diversity. And so keeping these types of things in mind as we go through the rest of our time where we're talking about university and DEI, as well as talking about industry and DEI, thinking about these aspects of diversity and your specific identities and how they play into the way that you interact with others. So going back to our panelists, I have a question. So this portion is related to the university. So what types of impact do you see that the newly talked about required courses and training for faculty, students, and staff having? Like, what kind of impact do you feel that that will have on our campus and our campus climate? Anyone can start.
I think it is interesting because I know there has been controversy at the University of Michigan regarding affirmative action, but I think really making an effort to hire, admit more students of color and other backgrounds, and also like hiring people of various backgrounds is really beneficial. And I'm not sure if it's really apparent yet, all these different changes that they're making or trying to make, but I am hopeful that it's going to bring positive and lasting impact to our community at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of issues over the years since the DEI plan was enacted. I think it's in its 5th year now. There's been a lot of concerns from the community about DEI and DEI initiatives just being used as ways to claim that the university is doing something about it, but they haven't seen a lot of that actually translated into action on the ground. And I know that things such as like requiring different diversity trainings at like new student orientation, for example, has been something that's kind of tossed around for a while. And in terms of requiring faculty trainings, I think it's a good step, but I'm afraid that one, there's going to be pushback, and two, that it's going to be one of those things where people approach it just as, checking a box as something that they just like have to have required, and then once the box is checked, it's something that people are going to forget about. So I think that there needs to be continued push to make sure that not only is there the box checked, but that there's kind of a continuation of work, DEI work happening at a lot of different levels within the university.
Thank you. That was a great segue into my next question. So from your perspective, what types of other initiatives do you feel that the university can or should engage in, other than saying, oh, we're requiring people to take these trainings, or we're going to incorporate classes into DEI, or we'll send an email, when things happen? What types of work do you think the university could be doing that they haven't done thus far? Or do you think that the university is doing all that they can or the best that they can?
That's a really good question. I really appreciate, I know like I remember someone I was speaking with had a really strong like opposition to the Go Blue initiative, but really I think it's a really great initiative in the sense that it helps people of color from like historically disadvantaged backgrounds, typically from low socioeconomic status, actually have the chance to go to University of Michigan. And I know that one of my, well, I'll leave it at that. I think that's a really good initiative they have, but also perhaps like creating more pipelines for disadvantaged communities to get into like a streamlined process into the University of Michigan so that the University of Michigan ready. I know that the University of Michigan is doing something for the Henry Ford College where they have a pipeline there, I believe. And I think that's a really good step in the right direction.
So my answer is twofold. The super big monster of an answer is that the university needs to divest from fossil fuels, because fossil fuel investment and a lot of the other business investments that the university holds are tied to the oppression of Black and brown bodies. But my simpler answer is in particular the bridge program that helps transition students from particular at-risk populations to university life. It's a required summer program, but students that are entering into the university through the bridge program are required to pay for a program that's required in order for them to join the school. And a super simple thing that can happen at a school with $1 billion endowment is to subsidize the cost of programs such as the bridge programs that are required for entry into the school. And I think that eliminating those cost barriers would help open up the school to a greater diversity of populations for whom that cost would pose like a significant socioeconomic burden.
That's a really good point, Logan. I definitely share that sentiment.
Yes, what I'm hearing is more of the allowance of having the socioeconomic status being at the forefront of their minds when making decisions, like how you're saying, Sean, the Go Blue guarantee is something that's been beneficial. But from Logan's standpoint, you know, when you're having this bridge program, not considering that making someone pay for this type of program to get into the school, you know, just lifts up another barrier for them when, you know, there are other barriers that they might be going through as well. So going off of that, when the students, you know, do get here after, you know, so-called putting down these barriers and obstacles for them to get here, there are lots of things going on in the world and on campus, whether it has to do with, like, last year when COVID struck, and we had the GEO thing going on. Then there's the Black Lives Matter process, and then everything that's going on with there. And now recently we have everything going on with Asian American and Island Pacific hate and stuff like that. So how do you guys feel that the university has, you know, handled situations like that? Do you feel that they've done a good job at responding to these big national incidences or worldwide incidences? And do you feel that this impacting the students in a positive or a negative way?
Well, I think that the COVID response was bad. Like, you know, I think we've seen that like within a month and a half or so. I'm not sure exactly on the timeline, but shortly after having fully open campus, we went completely online, and we basically had students kind of feeling like they were getting kicked off of campus again after going through a similar experience in March. And so I think that, you know, the university could have done a much better job in really adhering to the CDC and having everyone wear masks and enforcing that more aggressively, and also being more understanding of like issues that students may have regarding the ability to even move out and have somewhere to go. And so I think that was a big issue, and that I would love to see more improvement upon that. I know that the University of Michigan wants to open up the campus again in the fall. I'm not an expert by any means about whether that's a wise decision, but I take that I'm cautious or like hesitant to really put full stock into that decision.
So my answer to this question is twofold. So my first answer is that as a for-profit business, the university does a lot of things according to um, a lot of economic analyses. And I think that things such as response to DEI incidents are slow and calculated because they need to make sure that they are appealing to all stakeholders and not alienating a lot of their funders who um, may disagree with more progressive policies and stances. And my second answer is in specific regards to COVID, and also in regards to the university being a for-profit corporation, is that I don't think that sports should have continued, and sports is the main revenue source for the university. But I think that they did a disservice to their students by continuing to exploit student athletes who are here on scholarship and are not paid and adequately um, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Adequately compensated for all the services and publicity that they bring to the university. So I think that, yeah, I think that that's my answer, that the university puts profit over people at most chances it can get, and that like true steps towards like actual change in the world of DEI needs to start to value students not as just a number, but as like people.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, okay, so for the next part, before we go into talking more about, DI and industry, I wanted to do a more interactive portion where we can have an open discussion and talk about DI resources across campus, and then different ways that we as students and student organizations can, get involved and better help support, those impacted by the things going on. So I'm gonna drop a link in the chat for a Jamboard. And I can also share my screen so everyone can see it. But for those of you who are on your phone, or if you can't, interact with the Jamboard, feel free to unmute yourself or put in the chat anything that you would like to, add to the Jamboard. I'm gonna share my screen. We're only gonna be working on the first few slides for U of M DI, and then we'll go back to the panel to talk more about DI and industry, and then we'll move on to the second half of the Jamboard for some more interactive work. So for the first slide, it just says what DI initiatives exist across the university. And so here people can put any resources that they know exist across the campus, whether it be in their department specifically or for the university as a whole. Just so these resources are placed here and we can potentially share them out. Anyone who sees this recording can maybe get some access to resources they didn't know existed as well. So feel free to use the text box, the chat, unmute yourself if you can't interact with the Jamboard, and we'll just give it about a couple minutes for that. Okay, so I like to see, I like all of these different options for DEI initiatives across campus and things that everyone's doing. And so we can move on to the next Jamboard, which is how can the university better support those who are impacted? So just getting everyone's input on like different things that they feel that could be, done as Logan and John had mentioned in their responses to my questions. So thinking about different things that you would like to see from the university level um, in terms of DEI or just support in general for anything. So how we did the activity where we looked at all the different aspects of diversity and what goes into diversity. So seeing how the university can better support each of those different things that goes into diversity. I'm definitely liking all of these responses as well. Um, these are things that students have in mind. It's just in this room alone, we have all these thoughts about different things that the university can be doing. And so finding ways to vocalize our desires and things that we want is something that we as students, work on and like try to do. And so I'm also seeing more transparency on here. So that's a good one. I'm also on the DEI committee in my department. And so that's my committee. We focus on transparency within the civil environmental engineering department, talking about like different things that the university could do better, finding ways to get into those conversations, into those rooms, into those meetings where these things are discussed and making sure that they're heard often. One-time things aren't very beneficial, right? We're having this meeting here, but continuing conversations around these things is very important so that things are brought to the forefront of people's minds as we move forward. And so figuring out ways to, talk to, maybe the dean or even President March. So even though that's, very difficult to do, but finding ways to talk to those who make big decisions on different things would be great. So moving on to the next slide, this one is more about how MANRRS and other orgs can get involved and making sure that we're supporting those who are being impacted as well. And so as we did before on the slide, just put some things that you think that students should be doing and getting more involved with. And these can be actionable items that maybe we could implement in the future or pass on to other orgs to get involved with. And also can be things that we've already done, such as our mentorship program. That's something that we just launched. And so something we're doing that's really great. Right, these are some more great ideas and things that managers and other orgs can be doing to help those impacted by things going on in our current nation. And so thinking about things that we could do next year, and that is something that we could use these types of ideas for when thinking about things going on in the world and things that may happen over the summer or during times where we're not on campus, being able to respond and reaching out to people and being able to listen and find out what students need, collaborating with other orgs to best reach students. So I think I think there may be one more. No, okay. So we're gonna move on into the industry and DI topics now. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And we can start off with a couple of questions for our panelists, and then we'll move on to another interactive portion with the case study example for the industry portion. So my question for the panelists is, as MANRRS, minorities and ag natural resource and related sciences, we're going to often network with professionals in fields that resonate with our mission. We're going to be interacting with people who, have us on their minds. But in your experiences, at the university and in other places when you're networking, do you feel that DEI is a value that has been clear, when you're interacting with professionals? Is that something that you think that many organizations outside of those that speak with managers and other organizations that focus on minorities, do you feel that these companies and people in industry focus on DEI? And if so, where have you seen it? And if not, why do you think that that's the case?
I think it's really important to recognize that Black people are not a monolith and that we have various personalities and interests. And so really not trying to hold us to one expectation of Black culture or one manifestation of Black culture, I think is really significant. No one can lose there's no such, to me, there's no such thing as a Black card. And when it comes down to it, you're Black or you're not. So Blackness is not something that can be taken away from me. That's not something that, to me, no one can take away, and nothing can take away anyone's Blackness. And so I think that's really important to that's something that I would like to see in the professional workspaces, embracing the full spectrum of Black people.
One thing that I've heard a lot from just talking to others about the networking experience, I think a lot of the major environmental orgs in particular are very, very much on the path of white environmentalists. And I think there's starting to be some attention paid towards DEI topics at a lot of the larger environmental firms and organizations, but I still get the sense just from talking to people that a lot of the work is still being handled by white people, and I think that we need to progress to a point where like DEI issues aren't just white people talking about the importance of DEI issues. And I think that one thing that people can do to help in the industry is really supporting and drawing attention to the smaller nonprofits with diverse um, diverse staff who represent diverse stakeholders and diverse communities, and really um, pushing for greater things like greater sources of funding for those orgs, and just pushing for those orgs to have a seat at the table, I think is a space where DEI is still needed in industry and currently not being seen. Um, I had another thought, but it escapes me, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Also embracing Black hair within the professional workspace. I think it's something that some companies are making an improvement upon, but definitely is, the work isn't done until 100% of companies really accept that Black hair is beautiful, Black hair is precious, Black hair is professional, and respecting and honoring that.
Thank you both for sharing your experiences and your thoughts on DEI in the industry. So how transparent do you feel that industry should be about their DEI initiatives or their stance on DEI in their companies? Do you feel that's something that should be stated on like their webpage? Do you feel that they should bring that up in an interview, or do you feel that you should have to dig and like ask to find out those things?
So this was actually where I wanted to go with my last comment, but I've heard from several people who have been in interviews where they like when they're given the opportunity at the end of the interview to ask the interviewees a question, they explicitly ask like what is your company's relationship with DEI and how do your values and actions align with progressing DEI justice and equity? And it's like really telling when like a lot of the companies like or organizations just like kind of skirt around or squirm at that question. And so I think, yeah, I think transparency is a huge issue, and I think that DEI is still one of those things that's kind of taboo in industry, and people don't want to admit to the fact that DEI hasn't been like a strong consideration within implementation of like strategic plans and things of that nature. And but I think we're seeing a greater push towards holding industry accountable to those standards and making sure that they're being respectful and responsive to the communities that they're representing. And yeah, just making sure that they actually have all of their potential stakeholders in mind um, when they're hiring and planning for all their different activities and actions.
Yeah, I want to echo kind of like what Logan has said, and just I think that 100% transparency is really important. And I think that it's required to really pressure, like for us to pressure the university, or like to pressure the university and hold it accountable to really implement its DEI mission that it claims to have. So I think that transparency is a big part of that, because if we don't really know what's going on, they can do anything and just tell us anything and really just get away with doing nothing. And so I think transparency is a big part of change.
All right, thank you. And so for the last 10 or so minutes, we're gonna go back to the Jamboard. And first we're gonna just talk about the things that we feel are impact, like how DEI can impact the workplace and the environment there. And then we'll go on to like a small little case study where we can discuss kind of power dynamics and power structure in the workplace and how our identities play into that. So I'm gonna share my screen again for the Jamboard. Um, and again, you can use the chat or you can unmute yourself if you have anything to say that you're not able to type in to the Jamboard. And so I'll give that a couple of minutes for people to think about. I'm seeing some great thoughts on how DEI can impact the workplace, impacting the company itself, making it better, and how it can impact those working there, making them feel comfortable in the space. Greater productivity, more innovation. Okay. All right. For the last portion of the event, I wanted to do this little activity. And so it's like a case study. So the next Jamboard slide is the scenario on the hot moment. And so I'm going to read it aloud, but you can also read it to yourself. So you're currently working on a project team working on a team on a project at work. The day you present your results, there are several people present, including coworkers, your team leader, supervisor, and the client. Following the presentation, people are socializing, and your team leader says that the limited number of women in top positions in science may be due to issues of intrinsic aptitude. The room goes quiet for a few moments. Finally, a coworker decides to push back against the comment and says, "That's a pretty sexist statement." Your team leader gets defensive, and your supervisor tries to change the subject. The meeting ends, and everyone goes about their day. And so the last few slides, I have some just general questions about this, scenario. And so we can open it up to conversation. You probably don't have to use a Jamboard, but you can use the Jamboard if you prefer not to speak. But what could have been done during this scenario that it might have improved the outcome? And what are chosen strategies? Are the other strategies that you choose ones that both the employees and supervisors can readily use? So what do you feel that could have been done in this situation that would have made it a better outcome than what it was, and then everyone just leaving and not having discussed this conversation?
I think sometimes someone can be horribly wrong, but we won't get to them if the person feels like we are attacking them. And so like even though like I think sometimes what can really work is calling someone in rather than calling someone out, and kind of having discussion with them with why their viewpoint is wrong and why that statement was harmful, and what could they have done to really what they should like. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Anyone else have any thoughts on this question? What could have been done to improve this outcome?
Audie wrote in the chat to ask them why they feel that way.
So inviting them to elaborate.
And Zoe's also seconding Sean's comment.
Okay. All right, awesome. The next question I have is, what could you do personally or as a group to navigate a hot moment within a difficult discussion topic? So this could lead to this scenario, or it could be applied to any other scenario. So what would you personally do, or what could people do as a group to navigate these situations where there's kind of like this power dynamic here, where you're with your boss or you're with people who are technically above you in the hierarchy in the setting, but like what things could you do even if you feel a bit uncomfortable in the situation?
I think a big thing is just like naming that tension has arisen in the space, and just finding time to connect as a team and have people share their thoughts on the situation to try to come to not necessarily um, to solve the issue, but to some sort of agreeable resolution for all parties about how um, actions and behaviors can change to more align with DEI principles and better support the workplace environment.
So Zoe wrote in the chat to use your privilege if applicable. I totally agree with this. When you initially asked this question, my first thought initially went to, I'm not sure how I would even navigate a conversation like this, as I would personally feel kind of scared or worried that comments that I would potentially make would in turn have a negative consequence on myself via my position at this hypothetical job. And I know, like, from personal experiences, like when similar hot take moments happen within the workplace and you do say something, a lot of times if they are applicable to you and you're not in that position of privilege, they can have negative repercussions on you as well. So just definitely like elevating Zoe's comment on, if you have the privilege to speak upon this, do it. And definitely like stand up for especially parties that may feel like their voices are being silenced or may feel like it's not safe to discuss their true feelings within this setting without there being potential negative repercussions as well.
Yeah, that's another point, that there's kind of two sides to it, like both using your voice to kind of offset those repercussions that could happen, but also being cognizant of situations in which you can use your voice to elevate the voices of others and pass the mic to allow people to share their own experiences, and just kind of use your privilege to gain the floor and then yield the floor to others who might not be in a position to kind of gain the floor on their own.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, Logan, too. So Audrey wrote in the chat that sometimes it's hard to do in the moment, but sometimes it's better to let people cool off before proceeding with a calmer conversation. So I think that kind of ties in like perfectly of, while you might not be able to address it like in that direct moment due to potential like high tensions, like there may be a better way to address it once those tensions are not as high within that direct moment, and approach it, a little bit later on within that day when there may not be as large scale repercussions for speaking out potentially.
Yeah, definitely. Following up is another way that you can actively navigate a hot moment if you don't feel as comfortable speaking up in the moment, following up with those involved who you may feel a little bit comfortable telling them how you felt during the situation, and then allowing it to go from there, whether you reach out to the person who caused the harm or not. For the sake of time, I'm going to stop there for this part of the activity. There was one thing that I did want to share with everyone. I had did this activity with some groups in my DEI committee, and so there's a document that they had for hot moments that talk about what a hot moment is and things that you can do before, during, and after a hot moment. And so this is kind of where I got that activity from. So knowing the things that you're gonna, knowing your place in the area, and knowing if you have strong feelings towards what's going on, and being able to take a moment and think before you speak or before you react, to be sure that you're not gonna, go off in the moment, in the heat of the moment. Knowing who's there. So there oftentimes you're going to be in a place where you're not the person in charge, or you're not able to access that privilege that you would in other settings. And so being, having that kind of awkwardness of whether or not to speak up is something. And so there's a resource for this, for general discussion guidelines for the center. I think it's research, learning, and teaching. And they have things that talk about things in terms of having those conversations. And so during a hot moment, there are things that you could do in terms of, inviting people into the room or connecting with the topic. If you want to jump into the topic and dive into really, why did someone say what they said? Is this what you meant? Things like that. So if you're the only person that may feel uncomfortable in that moment, being able to get clarification instead of just taking it what they said directly as what they said it to be. And so making sure that everyone has that common understanding and clarifying those things before you leave the conversation. And then after, making sure you connect with those people, connecting with someone who's in your support network, and making sure you connect with and reflect with those that could have been a part of the situation, and making sure that people understand, you know, the harm that they caused, if they did cause any harm, and how to best move forward from that. But I can share this document with everyone if they'd like, if they're interested in knowing about hot takes. I'm gonna drop it in the chat. But thank you everyone for participating. Did anyone have any last questions or comments for us, our panelists, since it's just the e-board now?
I just want to thank everyone for sharing, and also thank you, Jordan, for facilitating this discussion.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording then.